This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Nigerians go back to the polls, this time to elect state governors. The latest efforts to normalize ties between the European Union and the Democratic Republic of Congo. And we continue with our coverage of China's annual political gathering. Hello and welcome to Africa Live. As always, great to have you with us. I'm Richard Nta, live in Nairobi. For those of you joining us across the continent and around the globe, we thank you for joining us. Let's take a look at other stories making headlines this hour. Why notes that have been scribbled on will not be recognized as legal tender in Egypt. And we tell you about the important milestones registered by women across the continent. We begin in Nigeria, where voters in 29 out of Nigeria's 36 states are electing state governors and lawmakers today. 91 political parties are taking part in the local polls, which are expected to renew political rivalry between the ruling APC and the main opposition PDP parties. Here's CGTN's Deji Badmus with more. Well, two weeks after they voted in presidential elections, Nigerians are now electing state governors and members of state houses of assembly. As CGTN's Samson O'Malley reports that the stakes are very high. Let's take a look.
If the card reader picks your card, verified, and your name is not in a register, you cannot vote.
They came out in force 2 weeks ago, and they are planning to come out again this weekend with their choices for 29 out of the 36 state governors.
I'm going to vote in this governorship election because it's necessary to vote. It's our right to vote and to bring a right candidate.
I urge you to maintain calm.
Nigeria's governors are among the most influential politicians in the country, controlling budgets sometimes larger than those for entire African countries.
As far as the people are concerned, the person who, as it were, holds their destiny in their hands is the governor.
More than 50 million Nigerians are expected to take part in the gubernatorial election this weekend.
In Nigeria's federal system of government, state governors wield enormous power and might just have more influence on the day-to-day life of citizens than the president himself.
The presidential elections 2 weeks ago were marred by the late arrival of ballot papers, boxes, voting materials, and the failure of smart card readers. The Nigerian Electoral Commission is working to improve things this time around.
From here, the materials will be escorted by armed security, which you have seen around, and tomorrow they will be distributed to the various rack centers. And on Friday, movement and activities of the rack centers will commence.
The presidential elections were also marred by violence, intimidation, and harassment. Those elections were won by incumbent President Muhammadu Buhari. Saturday's election is expected to be a straight fight down party lines between Buhari's All Progressive Congress Party and the opposition People's Democratic Party. Samson O'Malley, CGTN, Jos, Nigeria.
All right, is the European Union ready to normalize relations with the Democratic Republic of Congo? Relations may be improving, but an EU official says they cannot be described as normalized. The bloc is still adopting a wait-and-see approach. CGTN's Miriam Zaidi has more from Brussels and Chris Ochemringa from Kinshasa. Let's take a look.
Just last month at a joint EU-African Union meeting, the EU Foreign Affairs Chief Federica Mogherini said that they are ready to work with President Tshisekedi. The European Union is, of course, an important partner for the Democratic Republic of Congo and will most likely continue to play an important role in the country. Now, over the last few years, the EU has given some €709 million to the DRC to help improve governance, infrastructure, but it also, of course, maintains sanctions, a mix of both travel bans and asset freezes against those associated with Joseph Kabila. And those sanctions were renewed last December ahead of the elections. But for the EU, also having a representative on the ground would help. But when it comes to return of their ambassador to the DRC, who was ejected from the country on the eve of those elections in December last year, well, there's no date in the diary set for his return. Mariam Zaidi, CGTN, Brussels.
The reopening of the European Visa Center in Kinshasa marked the start of the normalization of ties between the new DRC government and the European Union. The center had been closed for 13 months by the government of former President Joseph Kabila in retaliation to EU sanctions against senior Congolese officials. In 2016, the EU imposed the sanctions on government officials over the violent crackdown on protests and the delay in organizing elections. Mr. Kabila's chosen successor, Emmanuel Ramazani Shadari, was one of them. The former government consequently expelled the EU ambassador to the DRC over the renewal of those sanctions. But President Felix Tshisekedi promised to ensure the return of the EU ambassador after he was declared the winner of the disputed election. He stressed the importance of having a partnership based on mutual respect. The EU has supported the DRC in restoring peace, democracy, and its healthcare system over the years. Chris Sochamringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
The UN Special Representative for South Sudan, David Shearer, says the country's peace agreement has been holding. He said the remaining challenge now was how to maintain the momentum of the peace pact. Addressing the UN Security Council, Shearer highlighted recent positive developments, including people expressing a willingness to return home, dozens of meetings held across the country, and a significant decrease in levels of political violence. However, he noted that the timetable set out in the agreement was well behind schedule, citing procedural issues as the main barrier. Shearer called on the council to join regional bodies to convince all opposition movements to join the peace process in South Sudan.
There are some who believe that a return to violence is inevitable. We don't concur. This agreement has broader buy-in from parties than the 2015 agreement. It is widely embraced by the population. We too have concerns about the peace process, but there is yet to be a perfect process. For our part, the UN has and will continue to focus attention and resources on making it work. And I want to stress there is no plan B. There is only plan A, this agreement and this path forward. And for it to have a chance to work, it needs to be supported.
To the Democratic Republic of Congo now, and the announcement of a power-sharing deal between the party of the President Felix Tshisekedi and his predecessor, Joseph Kabila, is drawing mixed reactions among Congolese citizens. CGTN's Chris Sochamringa reports from Kinshasa.
The party of DRC President Felix Tshisekedi signed a power-sharing deal after weeks of failed talks over the choice of a prime minister. Joseph Kabila's Common Front for Congo and President Tshisekedi's Cap pour le Changement agreed to jointly choose a new premier. Former President Kabila's coalition has more than two-thirds of MPs in parliament. Under DRC law, the party with a majority of lawmakers gets to choose the prime minister.
First, we have the possibility to decide that FCC will be the only one with the prime minister and all the ministers in the government, which is possible according to the law.
Some Congolese citizens have expressed concern about a power-sharing deal with the former president. Others are happy an agreement's been reached.
We are excited that the two sides have agreed to work together. We are now waiting for a prime minister who will serve our country.
The agreement between the two parties should be implemented quickly. We don't want further delays in the implementation of government projects.
President Tshisekedi has faced difficulties implementing changes he promised during campaigns because he has a minority in parliament. His election was disputed by opposition leader Martin Fayulu, who described it as a backroom deal with Mr. Kabila. Both the president and his predecessor have denied that claim. The announcement of a power-sharing deal comes a week after President Tshisekedi expressed frustration at being unable to win parliamentary support for his choice of prime minister. His reform plans for the country will now depend on how well he works in coalition with Joseph Kabila. Chris Ochamringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
We revisit our headline story in Nigeria, where voters in 29 out of Nigeria's 36 states are electing state governors and lawmakers today. 91 political parties are taking part in the local polls, which are expected to renew political rivalry between the ruling APC and the main opposition PDP parties. Here's CGTN's Deji Badmus with more.
Voting started quite early in quite a number of polling stations across the country, and like what was witnessed during the presidential election 2 weeks ago. This time, polling officials and materials arrived quite early at some of the polling units. Of course, there are a number of states where the process got off quite late. A good example is Lagos, where a logistics problem by the election regulator delayed voting by more than 2 hours in some places. Now, extra security have been deployed to some states that are considered flashpoints, like Rivers in the southern part of the country, which witnessed most of the violence in the last presidential election. It's still too early to tell what the turnout would be, but the expectation is that it might be higher than the presidential election, because this is a local election where most of the candidates are directly known to the electorate. Now, the election is happening across the country, but only in 29 states. And in some cases, as many as 64 candidates are vying for the position of governor in one state alone. Governors of the remaining 7 states are yet to complete their terms in office, and that is why election would not be taking place there. Now, the exercise has so far progressed smoothly. In some of the polling units were visited, and people have been expressing their happiness that were able to vote peacefully.
Today, honestly, they really impressed us, because I was expecting it to be like the other time. They came around 11 o'clock, but they were here before 8. So they really performed excellently this time.
One of the key states to watch in this election is Lagos. The ruling APC has been in power here since the return of democracy in Nigeria in 1999. It's one state the main opposition PDP has campaigned vigorously in the past to take, especially when it was in power at the center for 16 years, but just did not manage to do so. The state still remains firmly in the grips of the APC, so everyone is watching to see if this is the year that firm grip will be broken. But by the way, apart from the APC and PDP, there are 43 other candidates on the governorship ballot here. So fair enough to say the Lagos voters are spoiled for choice. Deji Badmus, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
To get more on this, we are joined by CGTN's Kelechi Emekalam in Abuja. Kelechi, thank you for joining us here on Africa Live. There have been fears of an outbreak of violence during the elections of governors. What's the latest from the polling stations across the country?
All right, now, governorship elections are actually being conducted in about 29 of the 36 states in Nigeria across the country. Like the presidential elections, where there were reported cases of violence, there are also fears that same may occur this time round. Violence, irregularity and fraud has become a recurring decimal in Nigeria's elections, and many blame from the politicians who want power at all costs to security agencies who are responsible for keeping the peace, and even to citizens who allow themselves to be used as tools to disrupt elections. However, INEC has been holding talks with security agencies who have promised not to let their guards down this time around and ensure that people vote in a peaceful environment and their votes are secure. But it might not be until much later that we will get in reports of violence anyway, if any.
Kelechi, talk to us about just how influential state governors in Nigeria are, and should we expect a high voter turnout?
Yeah, well, in Nigeria, the governors are indeed very, very influential, not just in their states alone, but to some extent, even at the center, that's at the federal level, they control huge resources, both capital and human resources are at their disposal.
All right, Kelechi Emekelam, thank you for that update and thank you for that report. Time now for a short break, but when we return, we continue with our coverage of China's annual political gathering. And we'll tell you about the important milestones registered by women across the continent.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. China's annual political season's focus this Saturday has been on the reform and development of the country's state-owned enterprises. The government is hoping with some freshening up, they can add some impetus to the country's slowing economy. Senior officials from the State-Owned Asset Supervision and Administration Commission of the State Council met the media earlier and outlined their plans for the coming year. Let's take a look.
In 2019, we'll continue to provide supply-side structural reform. We'll focus on promoting high-quality development and accelerate the cultivation of enterprises so they are competitive globally. One of our priorities is on the state-owned capital authorization management system. We'll introduce a list of regulations for this year, mainly to clarify boundaries and decentralize power. Other priorities include promoting the pilot for state-owned capital operations, the reform of mixed ownership and equity, the construction and contractualization of the managerial tenure system, as well as positive incentives.
China's Minister of Commerce, Zhang Shan, says the ministry will implement a raft of trade facilitation policies. Areas will include export, credit, insurance, financing, and others to reduce burdens and improve efficiency for foreign trade companies. Zhang also said imports will be expanded in scale and optimized in structure to meet domestic demands. China's legislature, the National People's Congress, is planning to tighten up environmental oversight for the Yangtze River. Legislators are busy drafting a protection law to promote green development of Asia's longest river. Sheng Lifeng, a member of NPC's top environmental protection committee, answered a question from CGTN's Ho Na on this. Let's take a look.
Environmental preservation is high on legislators' agenda. Taking a question from CGTN, Sheng Lifeng, a member of the NPC's top environmental protection committee, said the country greatly values the protection and green development of the Yangtze River.
First, we collected suggestions and opinions from experts, entrepreneurs, and law enforcement personnel. Then we formulated a general working plan to make clear the law's drafting procedure, working responsibilities, and timetable. We will accelerate our work in drafting the law and finish it within the timeline of our work.
The legislature has made protecting the Yangtze River a top priority. A working group has been set up. It involves the NPC's Natural Resource and Environmental Protection Committee, the Supreme People's Court, the Supreme People's Procuratorate, and the other central government departments. The Natural Resource and Environmental Protection Committee is heading the work. Committee members have visited at least 6 of the 19 provincial-level regions along the Yangtze River economic belt. In other matters, work on a real estate tax law is progressing steadily, said Liu Junchen, deputy head of the committee's Legislative Affairs Commission. The widely anticipated property tax law is being considered by the NPC Standing Committee. Legislators are also looking at the results of the latest deliberations on the draft foreign investment law. CGTN, Beijing.
The 8th of March is celebrated as International Women's Day. It was first introduced by the United Nations in 1975 to highlight women's achievements and the challenges. Despite this increasing focus on gender equality, women still aren't seen as equals to men in many parts of the world. In South Africa, the Motsepe Foundation hosted a summit to address the challenges faced by women. CGTN's Julie Shire reports. Let's take a look.
The Johannesburg Stock Exchange was one of the many bourses around the world that sounded the opening bell as a reminder to corporates and government of the gender disparities that still exist in society 44 years after the first International Women's Day was celebrated.
We have not done enough to ensure that we have enough women in leadership positions in government and in business. According to the World Economic Forum, it's going to take us 135 years to achieve gender equality at the rate that we're going currently. The pace is too slow. It is happening, but we need to see urgency.
This and other issues were highlighted at a Women's Day event in Johannesburg. South Africa has one of the most progressive constitutions in the world, but 51% of the country's population are female and still do not benefit fully.
I would like to see my country when women are treated equally as men in workplaces. Women don't have to work an extra mile or 10 times more in order to prove that they are worthy. Someone must get it because they deserve it beyond reasonable doubt.
Parents should teach their children about the equality, that they're equal. Like simple things such as chores. You can't say, okay, you go do the garden and she'll wash the dishes and cook after that. Why can't I go do the garden? What if I want to go do the garden? And what if he wants to come do the dishes?
South Africa celebrates 25 years of freedom this year, but women still remain marginalized in many spheres of society. Delegates here are calling for more effective policy implementation to balance the scales between men and women.
When it doesn't quite pinch you, you don't jump and move as hard as the one who is being pinched by the shoe. You need women deeply involved in this project, because once they are deeply involved in it, they are going to make sure that results are achieved speedily.
Government has made strides in dealing with imbalances in the public sector, but men still hold more than half of the skilled positions, something that has to change for South Africa to achieve gender equality by 2030. Julie Shire, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Staying in South Africa, the Cape Town Chinese Women's Association hosted an event to celebrate the International Women's Day. Members marked the day through Chinese folk dances, songs, and poetry recitation. This was followed by lectures on health, fitness, and skills for successful entrepreneurship. The theme for this year's International Women's Day: urge leaders to think equal, build smart, and innovate for change.
They have showcased their marvelous performances, singing, dances, poem recitation, and deliver short lectures to share their successful experience on how to start up and run a good business. I think it's a good platform on which everyone here can exchange their experience and learn from each other.
And to Nigeria, where policymakers are under no pressure to create a conducive environment for more women to compete for elective office. Nigeria has the lowest political participation of women in sub-Saharan Africa at less than 5%. CGTN's Kelechi Mekalam has more.
For more than 2 decades, Rose Giar has worked as a social entrepreneur in Nigeria's capital, Abuja. She recently turned into politics and contested for a seat in the Senate only 2 weeks ago. But she didn't win. About 49% of voters in Nigeria are women, but the country has the lowest number of women occupying political offices.
I have never been interested in politics, as in politics in the real sense of it.
Several women like Rose are now challenging the status quo, advocating for women inclusion in politics. but they face numerous obstacles. Nigeria is a deeply conservative country where women participation in politics is still resisted.
Our tradition encourages our naivety. Our cultures also does not give us room to really go out and, what I would say in code, dig it out with the men in terms of contest for positions and for roles and responsibilities.
President Muhammadu Buhari, who won the just concluded presidential election, has promised more roles for women and youth in his next government. He was widely criticized for giving only 16% of political appointments to women in his first administration. This time, he's pledging 35% slot for women. Providing a conducive space for women vying for elective offices in Nigeria has become a key rallying point, not just at home. All election observer groups in this year's elections made a note about it.
That has not been an increase in the proportion of women candidates. Parties need to make more efforts in promoting their participation.
Low participation of women is not just restricted to politics. A survey conducted by a non-profit women's organization called Women in Business and Public Service shows women make up only 10% of board membership in Nigeria. It's a gap that could take decades to close. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
As part of activities marking this year's International Women's Day, Google has announced the launch of what it calls 18 new Women Will chapters across sub-Saharan Africa. Women Will seeks to create an economic opportunity for women everywhere so that they can grow and succeed. CGTN's Deji Badmus has been talking with Juliet Ehimoan Chiauzer, the country director of Google in Nigeria, for more insights. Let's take a listen.
It's very important to create the enable environment for technology growth and for people to be able to participate in the digital economy. And that's why it's important to have affordable internet, because that's the starting point. People getting online gives them the opportunity to then take advantage of the tools that are available online. And there are a number of initiatives by Google, by other stakeholders within the private sector, and by government to address this. One of the things that we've done recently, last year, we announced the launch of Google Station, which is a free public Wi-Fi access initiative in collaboration with ISPs, and we're open to partnering with telecom operators as well. And this is providing high-speed free internet access to people in public locations. There have been other initiatives as well, providing internet access to schools, also in collaboration with ISPs, partnering with OEMs to bring down the cost of smartphones so that more people can afford them and be able to engage in that way. And it's an ongoing effort. It'll be great. The cost of data right now is still high relative to average income of the population, and it'll be great to be able to drive down these prices, working jointly with all stakeholders in the industry and the regulator as well. So there's been some progress over the years, but there is still a huge gap. And we really need to look at this from the grassroots. So it's like a pyramid, right? If we want to increase the number of women that participate in technology and bubble to the top, we need to increase the base at the pyramid, which means we need to make sure that more girls have access to education. We need to ensure that more girls are given the opportunity to express themselves, to go after their dreams, right? You know, when we have, situations around, child marriages, or we have situations where in some societies, education for the girl child is frowned upon. When you have situations where in some cases girls are, giving negative messaging around, what is expected from them and how far they can go, all these signals get embedded in the subconscious, and this affects the population at the base of people that even get into the game in the first place, right? And that subsequently reduces the number of people that, feel that confidence to be able to go for careers in technology and rise to the top.
Well, Ethiopian Airlines has initiated a return flight operated by an all-women crew to mark this year's International Women's Day. The flight from Addis Ababa to Stockholm, Oslo, and then back to Ethiopia left on Thursday and returns this Saturday. CGTN's Coletta Wanjohi reports from Addis Ababa.
Amsale Gwalu is the captain of Ethiopian Airlines all-female operation this International Women's Day, in charge of flying from Addis to Europe and back with a women-only crew.
I'm sure this flight inspires a lot of young girls to be part of, to achieve whatever they want and go for their dream.
Amsale became the first female Ethiopian Airlines captain in 2010. In December 2017, she flew to Lagos on what was the first all-women flight in Africa. This is the fifth such flight Ethiopian has operated globally. The airline has operated women-only flights to Lagos, Bangkok, Kigali and Buenos Aires before this route to Europe. Ethiopian says it plans many more after International Women's Day. Kalkidan Girma is not involved this time, but was part of the all-women flight in 2018 too. She began her career as a pilot when she was 21 years old. 7 years later, she says being a pilot has nothing to do with gender.
All the challenges are because of the job, not because of the gender. So it has nothing to do with being a female. But luckily, we're being more progressive. So people are coming towards it, and more women are interested in being pilots nowadays. So I have a feeling that in a few years, being a pilot is going to be a norm for females.
And Ethiopian Airlines says it is setting its sights high as it tries to boost its female staff.
Young girls should believe that they can be pilots tomorrow, they can be engineers, they can be aeronautical engineers, designing airplanes, maintaining airplanes, and flying airplanes. So it is an inspiration for all the young girls and women in Africa.
The airline has 100 female technicians in different sectors. Its aviation school in Addis Ababa has attracted female students from all over Africa. And as the flight touches down in Addis Ababa on Saturday, its crew will hope to have inspired a new generation of women to aim for the skies. Coletta Wanjohi, CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
All right, you're watching Africa Live on CGTN. Time now for a short break, but here's what's ahead on business. Why notes that have been scribbled on will not be recognized as legal tender in Egypt.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. Let's talk business. Egypt's central bank has banned cash transactions carried out with notes that have been scribbled on. Love messages, reminders, or calculations are the most found messages apparently, but the central bank has had enough of what technically is defacement of legal tender. CGTN's Yasser Hakim has the details.
Have you ever written on a euro, on a dollar, or any local currency note? Well, in Egypt, it's a common act. Love messages are the most popular you can find, like this Saudi lady had discovered.
When he first wrote on money and gave it to me, I was surprised because we never do this in Saudi Arabia. But I was happy because it was new and unique. Till now, I'm saving the notes as a nice memory.
I used to write her during our engagement time. I used to write romantic words on the money and hand it to her, but not after marriage.
Millions of Egyptians do the same.
I used to write jokes to my friends and laugh about it when we were kids. Many people wrote on money for me. When I did well at school, my teachers would also do the same for me.
My relatives would give me money notes when I passed my exams. I have a lot of money from this at home.
At school, I used to take £10 notes every week from my teacher, with stars on it as I was a good student. Lately, sometimes I receive change with advertisements written on it from different restaurants. A new way to publicize the project.
Therefore, it was a shock to most when the central bank announced it has banned the use of notes that have writings on it.
The reason is that according to law, any notes with writings on them are considered unfit, just like damaged ones. Every week, the banks hand them over to the central bank to burn them and replace them with new ones. This decision aims at protecting the Egyptian pound notes and their shelf life.
Suddenly, Egyptians are carrying millions of notes that have become useless. To help out Egyptians with this dilemma, some online articles have been advising Egyptians to use nail polish removers to wipe out writings from the money. I have with me a £5 Egyptian note with some love messages on it. And now I will use the nail polish remover with a piece of cotton to wipe out the money and see what happens. It looks much better, but not good enough. The central bank has opened the window of a couple of months only to receive unfit pounds. Then it will not be accepted in any financial transactions.
Burning the damaged notes and replacing them with new ones is a very costly affair for the state budget. People who write on money are not aware of the losses that they incur on the state budget because we import the paper on which we produce the money. But the losses will be temporary. In the long run, we will preserve the pound and save a lot.
The central bank hopes the unique culture of writing on money should cease to exist by the end of the year. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Africa is being urged to address a capacity deficit seen across the continent in order to achieve more development and better governance. According to the African Union's specialized agency, it will require adequate and sustainable funding from African states to help realize this objective. CGTN's Gerum Chala sat down with the Executive Secretary of Africa Capacity Building Foundation, Professor Emmanuel Nandoze.
Each year, or each period, when we publish our African Capacity Report, as I said, which is our flagship publication, we do measure the capacity that countries have developed and how they are moving. And so we have an indices that we use to do that. So the Capacity Development Index helps us to determine where countries are. The good news is, if you compare to 15, 20 years ago, when you used to have a large proportion of them in the low capacity category, today you have the larger proportion in the medium capacity category. But of course our goal is to have as many of them as possible in the high capacity category. A country like where Rwanda again features there, a country like Ghana, or even Morocco or Tunisia or Malawi or Burkina Faso, those are the sort of countries that one can see right away have really attained that kind of high capacity level.
In a nutshell, what are the suggested ways of perhaps developing capacity in Africa, including in regional communities or at the government levels throughout the continent?
Yes, of course, the first thing is to understand the nature of the problem and the magnitude of the problem. And this is what ACBF has done. We have done three important studies on the capacity dimensions of our capacity imperatives for achieving Agenda 2063. We then put together a strategy for addressing the challenge. So we have done that already, and it's available for anybody who wants to look at that.
Obviously, capacity building is not only important to perhaps harness the potentials of a certain country or achieve continental agendas. It's also important to engage African states with their partners, such as China. Through the Belt and Road Initiative, countries which have better strategies and delivery mechanisms can benefit better, is well known. According to you, how are you planning to support African states to perhaps partner better with China?
We have, the most simplest thing that one can see is that to have consultation and a good strategy for engagement with China. Because China has a strategy for engagement with Africa. And on the other side, you don't see that. And secondly, too, that there should be an approach of working together so that you don't work against each other on the continent here to dissipate your own interest.
In Senegal, a women empowerment activists are lobbying for increased consumption of locally manufactured products. Now, through her food processing company, her ambition is to one day open a chain of supermarkets that are 100% stocked with African products across the continent. CGTN's Beryl Oro has that story.
Esitu Diang's dream is to one day open a 100% African product supermarket chain across the continent. She intends to achieve this through her company Free Work Services. With a processing unit located 30 kilometers from Senegal's capital, Dakar, Esitu and her employees produce up to 1.2 tons of processed products each day. From cereals to vegetables and fruits, Free Work Services offers a range of more than 40 products that are marketed on the national and international markets under the Kumbat brand.
My ambition is to make our products available everywhere in Dakar and throughout Senegal as the flour rice or any other product in a shop. We want consumers to go to shops without any worries and for consumption to be widespread across the country. The demand is high, but for the moment we are unable to adequately satisfy it because we have not yet succeeded in setting up a real marketing chain. Another ambition of mine is to open a large supermarket where all the local products from Senegal and other countries can be accessible. Although we have put quality, rigorous monitoring on the processing and packaging chain, we still want our products to remain like the products in other markets.
Apart from food processing, Esitu is also an activist for women empowerment. Her company employs over 52 people, 40 of whom are women.
My role here is to wash the cereals. When the vehicle offloads them, we bring them to this room where the washing takes place. And to ensure that the product is clean, we run it through several washing phases, all done by hand. Thanks to the income I earn here, I help my husband with my family's daily expenses, and I also manage to pay for my children's education and care.
Esitu has been in this business for 25 years. In 1994, after the devaluation of the CFA franc, she changed her import-export trade to food processing and quickly became a local consumption advocate. This is helping create jobs for the locals.
This job helps me in many ways. It is a job that I'm very passionate about because we always have this desire to produce food that pleases our consumers.
In addition to its production unit, Free Work Services now has production facilities, 2 of which are located in the Senegalese capital, Dakar, allowing for her products to cost between $1 to about $9. Beryl Oro, CGTN.
Time now for another short break. We've got a lot more news coming your way, including a vaccine shortage compounds Madagascar's devastating measles outbreak.
Anybody who's going to a business is taking a risk from day one. It's our job to understand the situation, to understand the market, to bring in a service. If one idea does not work, we move to the next one. That's what entrepreneurs are all about.
The issues of climate change will affect everybody, and I think it's important that every single one of us should take part in fighting the virus, in ensuring that we introduce alternatives to charcoal in this country.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back to Madagascar now, and the country is facing a devastating measles outbreak. Nearly 1,000 people have died since October last year, most of them being children. The latest epidemic is the worst to hit the island nation in decades amid shortage of vaccines.
Dada is coming to terms with the loss of his 4-year-old son. He and his 2 sisters each lost a child this January following a measles outbreak in the country. Nearly 1,000 people, mostly children, have died so far.
They are gone, and it was all God's will. But we did not expect that not being vaccinated would kill them.
Lack of enough vaccines has compounded efforts to fight the outbreak. Left with little options, families have resorted to cheaper traditional treatments.
My child had been vaccinated and received the first injection, but he died because we did not have the means to get him to the second injection. I could not afford to take him to a public hospital, so I took him to a quack to get the injection.
Government is working to ensure the vaccines are available. Currently, health authorities have rolled out a routine 2-dose vaccination program. The first shot is free, but the booster is not.
The main challenge is how to plan for what comes after. For the last 25 years, Madagascar has not been successful in immunizing its children against measles, so we can only hope that after this campaign, Madagascar will now have all it needs to do it as routinely as possible.
Nearly 2/3 of children in Madagascar have not been vaccinated, and with every passing hour, the need for vaccines is becoming dire. Terry Wangari, CGTN.
In West Africa, a group of Senegalese women have been raising awareness about irregular migration challenges. They used poems and traditional dances to illustrate the dangers faced by illegal migrants. Let's take a look at that story.
Women migrants who have returned to Senegal got a chance to share their experiences in this event organized by the International Organization for Migration. Ndeye Fatou Sall worked as a maid in Saudi Arabia for 80 years.
When you go there, you will have a contract. It is a Saudi who has to make your contract. His name will be on your papers. When you get to the airport, first of all you lose your dignity because they take your passport. Over there, you already lost your dignity. Then you're not allowed to leave the airport until the boss comes. He will come take your passport and take you like it was slavery, like you are sold.
Here, for example, it's the women who push their husbands. It's the women who push their children. It's the women who push their brothers. And it's the women who push their cousins, uncles, and others to leave the country. And it's the women who even push their daughters to leave the country.
Many Senegalese have died trying to flee the country in search of a better life.
It's more difficult for women to share their migration stories because they can be stigmatized. But some do engage, speak on the radio, and participate in these activities.
The awareness campaign hopes to especially reach out to mothers to discourage their children from dangerous migration acts. Beryl Oro, CGTN.
For years, scientists have gathered information linking animal behavior to the climatic environment that they live in. In Egypt, zoo managers and the animal carers are giving the animals hot drinks to help them survive the cold season and to manage the impact climate has on their behavior.
Climate and environmental changes have a direct impact on all life, and for animals born to survive in the wild, drastic changes to their status have to be managed to stifle the threat.
We give animals hot drinks in the winter because it gives them energy and it helps them forget that they are caged.
For workers at Cairo's Giza Zoo, the winter season calls for new feeding programs to keep the animal spirits high.
Chimpanzees like tea because of their genes, because they share 94% of their genes with humans. So we feed them with tea and milk, and belila, an Egyptian food containing wheat and milk. In these days, we make tea with honey and we make belila to help the chimpanzees keep warm.
The beginning of every year in Cairo records bitterly cold temperatures going as low as 13 degrees centigrade or even as low as 0. And for animals accustomed to free movement for survival, zoo constraints come with extreme temperature exposure.
If the animal feels cold, it might get a flu and it might get sick at any moment. So we try to replicate their life conditions in nature by giving them food regularly. We need to clean their cages. When you do things the right way, the animal will live with you for a long period.
In addition to the weather challenge is the issue of space.
When there is a big number of caged animals, there's less space. As a result, the animals become nervous. It affects their reproduction negatively because they're caged in a tight space. They're used to living in nature. Even if they were born in captivity, their behavior reflects life in nature. We have 5,600 animals of all species, more specifically 5,640 birds, reptiles and mammals.
And in line with the animal protection agenda, efforts taken up by Giza Zoo advance the role that such institutions have to preserve various species for future generations. Beryl Oro, CGTN.
And we've got your sports news coming up after the break. Here's a look at what's ahead. The penultimate round of the CAF Champions League continues with the DRC's AS Vita facing Egyptian giants Al Ahly.
Africa Live. Find your voice.